improviser.
And
This is
Yes,
But Why
podcast.
So I've started in Philly, did improv there for a long time, and then I formed my own short form group kind of fell into the short form group, and it became what I expected to be a 3 to 6 month thing, turned into an 8-year gig. And it was quite a while, and just left that group late last year and about to get married. So, different priorities in life have taken over, but looking to sort of supplant my roots a little bit more in Delaware over the past year, over the next year, doing some improv around here for sure.
I've talked to a couple people in Pennsylvania, but mostly in the Pittsburgh area. Tell me about Philly Improv. How did you get, or whatever the name of the actual theater is that you started, how did you get started there? You grew up in Philadelphia. Did you go to college or any, somewhere in Pennsylvania, or did you leave and come back?
Yeah, I grew up in suburban Philly, and I went to a college in Jersey for 48 hours. Didn't like it. Went back to suburban Philly, I was always a theater kid. I was always an acting kid. So I didn't actually do improv until after I graduated college, and went to classes with comedy sports. And it was kind of almost on a dare. I went to a comedy sports show with two of my best friends, and my one friend, Tom, nudged me. He goes, "You should try this." And I was like, "No way, no." And then next thing I knew, I was taking comedy sports classes and did the full beginner through advanced, and just haven't stopped since then. And that was, 14 years ago. And it's just been a really, really fun journey. I did the festival thing for a long time, bounced around among a lot of the festivals. And, like I said, in 2010, because Philly is amazing, and it's a hotbed for improv that I don't think people realize is a hotbed for improv.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then what ultimately I sort of got in the beginning of when it was becoming that hotbed. And then next thing I knew, there were 3,000 groups in Philly, it felt like, and it was much harder to get shows. It was much harder to get on any kind of bills. And so I was like, oh, all right, I'll just do my own thing, and formed the group. And like I said, it started as a tiny little thing in somebody's basement, and I became the artistic director. I became the producer. I performed with the group as well. And like I said, did that for about 8 years, and it was fun. It was totally fun.
Is that better than bacon?
It is better than bacon. Yep.
Awesome. So tell me about that. Tell me about that experience. Now, did you recruit the members, or were there people that you were already playing with, and then you kind of were like, hey, why don't we make a troupe? How did it come together?
It was a funny story, actually. So I was teaching an improv class at a night school, and unbeknownst to me, there is a concurrent improv class going on at the same time in a different building. So week one of the students, his name was Jack, went to my class by accident. He was supposed to go to the other class. And I wanted him to stay. The night school said, no, you have to stick with the class you signed up for, which kind of blew my mind because the other class had a wait list and I didn't. So I'm like, well, just move him over and bump down the wait list a little bit. But they luckily, it was the best thing that could have ever happened. So fast forward about 3 months, after the class was done, one of the one of the students in Jack's class, apparently they had all taken classes together for a while, said, this guy Jack was in our class. He said he took 1 week with you, but thought you might want to direct a troupe. And I was like, yeah, okay. And when she said direct a troupe, again, I thought, okay, I'll just run some improv workshops, do this for 3 to 6 months, and we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah, I hear you.
And we rehearsed for, 7 months, 8 months. And then our first show was at a nature center, and our in our green room were snakes. And I mean, they weren't just slithering around, but it was kind of a surreal experience being in among snakes when you're doing Zip Zap Zop. And did our first show, and it exceeded all of our expectations. And so, yeah, to backtrack, I did some of the folks from my class and some of the folks from the other class. We essentially all merged and became one big group. And then we picked up one show that was intended to be a one-off, and we sold it out. We sold 120 tickets. Whoa. And suddenly became a residency. And then we did other residencies and performed everywhere. And it was this happy little accident of Jack coming to the wrong class. And by the way, Jack is also going to now be the officiant at my wedding. So it shows how amazing this happy little accident truly ended up being. Turned into this phenomenal thing that I was so grateful to be a part of. And I discovered how much I loved producing shows too, because we were short form. So I loved the puzzle of trying to figure out a set list and, placing which games where and assigning which players to which games. And it became a frustrating puzzle at times, but once it came together, it felt so good to put that together.
Yeah. So I have a question. What happened to that other teacher? Were they pissed that you were the cool guy and everyone wanted to hang out with you?
The only thing I never knew, I know the teacher's name, but I've never met him. Apparently they just didn't click. For whatever reason, they just didn't click with him. So that's all I kind of really knew. I mean, I heard some stories here and there about some issues that they may have had with him, but
but he didn't really show up to your class and smack you with a glove or anything like that,
No, never did that. Thankfully, that would have been awkward, but didn't do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Battle it out over who gets directing, right? WrestleMania.
Well, it's funny because sometimes when I talk to people about improv scenes, they'll tell me that it's real contentious, this theater versus that theater. And I've witnessed that kind of stuff. And then sometimes you talk to people and they're like, no, everyone's friends. It's all okay. It doesn't matter. And so I don't know, some places are really able to be easygoing about it, and some people are not. So I just wondered what happened. There were two teachers, and then you're you're telling me this great story of how everyone was like, we want to hang out with you, and it's it sounds like a great movie, but who plays the villain? Because this guy,
right? Who's that 80s principal in the John Hughes movie that's waiting in the wings to sabotage everything?
Right. Or when everyone leaves his classroom, he walks into the classroom and there's no one there. He takes his hat off and throws it in the ground.
He might have done that. I don't know, but
I guess you're right. We weren't in that room.
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah,
wasn't there. Couldn't tell you. Nope.
So I come from a mostly long form background, so I don't know that much about short form shows. And when you were describing the producing element of organizing it and putting different people in it, it sounded a bit to me like, doing a sketch show. You pick which sketches or which games go in, and then what order you put them in. And other thing that's super intensely coincidental between your story and something that's happening to me right now. I have a sketch show, so I'm trying to associate what I know with your story. And I think of my sketch show, and you're talking about this show that you're putting on. I have been doing this sketch show that I have for 8 years, and I'm ending it this November, and it's 8 years. And so I'm oh, he has the 8-year thing. I wonder. So so you ended it after 8 years. Tell me what it felt like. Tell me how I can heal.
I will say this. So I ended it, or the group still exists. The group is still going on, and they're doing wonderfully, and I'm so happy for them that they are.
Oh my God, that's so much more intense.
Yeah, I needed some time away. Again, I'm getting married, and it was in the process of looking for a new job, which I'm now just starting next week. So all the changes in my life are happening all at once.
Right.
But I remember the first couple weeks, I was sleeping better than I ever had, and because I was always, if I wasn't working and wasn't doing family stuff, I was focusing on the improv shows.
Yeah, and it's stressful, totally.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't have to put together a set list. I don't have to contact a theater. I don't have to do any of these things. And it felt glorious. And then I'd say 2 months in, and this is the part that's going to suck to hear, it hit me like a ton of bricks how much I missed it. Yeah. Like, I missed it so much. And I did the absolute worst thing I can do. And I started watching videos of the old shows, which was so dumb of me to do. Because
it's like listening to old voice messages of your ex. Don't do it.
It's exactly what it was, except it's hour and a half long voice messages just watching these shows. And but luckily in the interim, I was a co-producer for a comedy festival here in Wilmington called the Tax-Free Comedy Festival, because we don't have sales tax in Delaware.
Oh, so right.
So I helped co-produce that this year, and we had a couple of acts drop out. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do a couple shows. Why not? So I got to at least get my fill a little bit there. But it was kind of, it was almost like its own, not the exact stages of grief, but I felt like it all came in steps and it came in waves. And like now I'm at the acceptance stage where,
totally.
I miss it, and I'm definitely itching to do something again. I don't know what form that's necessarily going to take, but I'm also content at the same time. Like I'm not like, I would say 3 or 4 months ago, I was looking at Craigslist. I was looking for audition notices. I just had this mental panic almost of just trying to find my next thing. And it's all kind of calmed down, which has been nice. Yeah.
One of the reasons why I do this podcast is because I think that when you do creative stuff, there's ebbs and flows of it. Like sometimes you're super hot and busy. Like there's so much stuff going on. You got 3 shows every week. Like you're so creative. You're doing so much stuff. And then sometimes there's lulls. There's moments when you don't do anything at all, either by choice or just by circumstance or whatever. And I think it's important to acknowledge all those parts of the creative journey that like sometimes, and it's almost like, cause I teach too. And so I'm talking to a lot of 20 somethings and they'll be very, this is their first community. This is the first crowd they've ever connected with this way as an adult. This is the first troupe they've had. Maybe this is the first sketch show. And when it breaks up or things happen, it's like, it's all right. Keep it going. There'll be more. There's always more because it's inside of you and it will continue to well up. And yet I give that advice every day of my life. And yet when it happens to me, I'm like, what's happening? And I'm like, all by myself. Like that's what's happening in my head all the time. It's me staring at the rain, crying, and so 8 years, I wondered if there was like a particular, but what's funny? It's happenstance that we both have 8 years because my life is the same thing as what's going on with yours, which is I had a baby a year ago and I tried. Thank you. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials.
Thank you.
And, when I had the baby, I was like, it's fine. I'm going to keep doing theater. I can do this. So I had the baby last May. And when I did, I was doing shows monthly and I set up a organized situation for the next 3 months after I had the baby and gave myself a maternity leave and handed it to my cast and was like, you guys have to run the show for 3 months. And I gave them like a full like Google folder of information of like stuff they needed and like ways to promote and the login for the Facebook page and all that crap, you know?
This sounds so much like me.
Yeah. I thought it was totally great. And they did it for 3 months and it was wonderful. And then I came back and I was doing it for months and months and months and months and months. And it was like, yeah, I can do this. This is great. And now my baby's gotten big enough that he's like not a lump of clay. Like he's not like just sitting in a thing staring at me. He moves around. He talks. He has interests. He doesn't like stuff. Occasionally he cries. Like, so I can't do all the things. I used to bring him to rehearsal and he'd just sit there and have a good time. He would just enjoy rehearsal. But now it's like, I got to bring him with like 17 toys to like distract him and like a little fence to keep him away from walking in the middle of the stage while the scene's going on. Like, you know, so I get the idea. So that's why I decided I was going to end The Neighborhood, which is my sketch show. I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to do this if I'm going to half-ass it. So I'm going to focus my attention on my life stuff. And I'm glad that you've had this, and I appreciate you telling me how it went, because I'm like, okay, cool. I can do this. He can do it. I can do it. We're going to be good. You know, and it's like, it's important to focus on those life things and to like let those things happen. It's almost like
because you don't want to. Yeah.
No, say whatever you're gonna say.
Because you don't want to end up hating it. Like you love it so much that you don't want to end up begrudging. Because it's nothing with the art form. You love the art form, but you don't want to get to the point where you start begrudging the art form and start begrudging the things that you do for it. And I felt like I was headed in that direction, not because of the people. It was just, it's a lot of work. And I'm like, if I step away and give myself at least a little bit of a break, and the most important thing for me too, I can't put a timetable on this, which was a very hard thing to do. Like when the next thing's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So for me to be able to walk away and not put a timetable on it, put me a little more at ease. And because I felt like at the pace I was going, that if I keep going, I'm going to walk away for much, much longer, if not permanently. And I'm like, I love this too much to do that. And so the first month I didn't do a show was the first month I hadn't done any kind of show in probably almost a decade, and that was a very weird feeling to literally have a 30-day period of doing no performing. And then I got through it. And then I got through the next one. And then finally I did, like I said, get a couple gigs in there. But now I can say, now that I've walked away from it for long enough, I can say, you know what? I miss it. I still love it. I'm ready to go back. But when the right thing comes along, whether it's something I find or whether it's something else that falls into my lap, either way.
Now, did you just move to Wilmington? So like you don't have like an existing improv scene in Wilmington right now, do you? Or do you?
There actually is a pretty good improv scene here. So there's a group. We have a theater company in Wilmington called City Theater, and they are headed up. They have an improv group, an in-house improv group called Fearless Improv, which is directed by a very good friend of mine named Janice Savini, who is the one who started the comedy festival, the Tax-Free Comedy Festival, and asked me to come aboard with that. And it's interesting when you were talking earlier about whether or not theaters can coexist. When she took over that group, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, I felt like there was a quiet rivalry between Better Than Bacon and Fearless that I never quite understood. And she came to one of my shows, and then we went out to dinner afterwards, and she's like, let's just do stuff together. None of us are getting rich off this. Let's just do stuff together. Let's share ideas. Let's share cast members. And we started doing that. And so luckily she has kind of revitalized the improv scene in Wilmington to the point that I think we're between what she did with Fearless and the comedy festival. I think we're going to see Wilmington actually pick up some steam in terms of improv and comedy in general.
Good. So you've been there long enough that you've met people and done stuff, or is it that the Philly scene and the Wilmington scene are around each other a bunch?
They're around each other a bunch. I mean, Philly is half hour, 40-minute drive from Wilmington.
Right on.
And Janet and I met when we were both in the Philly scene. And it's basically everywhere I've lived has been within close proximity to Wilmington. And I just officially finally made the move when I got engaged last year. I've been engaged a while, so I'm like, it was last year? Yes, it was last year.
Oh, it's like when people ask you, wait till after you're married, and then they ask you how long you've been with your significant other, and you're like, you mean since we were married or before? And then you're like, wait, how many years was that? Was it like 2.5? And then, it's trouble. I have my wedding date embroidered on a thing hanging in my living room. Very helpful. I would suggest it. Yeah. It's like,
I think I might have to take you up on that idea.
And I look right over my husband's shoulder and I tell him the date as I read it off the wall. Believe me, it's terrible. Terrible. Oh man. Yeah, that's so funny. How is your significant other also in comedy?
Not at all, but she thankfully has embraced it, and it was a great Match.com thing that I was able to advertise. And I think scarier than my first date was her coming to my first improv show.
Oh,
that was a million times scarier, and because she brought a couple friends, I think, at least one friend.
Oh no!
Yeah, so,
she didn't just come by herself.
Oh no, that was and I knew this in advance. Like there were no surprises with this.
Oh, but goodness.
And it was their first time meeting me, so I'm like, I got to be hopefully my normal, I'd assume, nice self. And now the pressure to be funny is 10 times more. Yeah. Like I can't bomb this show.
Right.
Normally I'm pretty even keeled before a show, and I am like pacing the hallways, and I have a whole wrestling theme playlist that I listen to when I need to get pumped up. So I'm just pacing the hallways, listening to my WWE theme playlist, just trying to get in the right frame of mind to have all the energy to go out there. And I did okay, but I don't know if it was my best show.
Well, she's still marrying you, so
she's still marrying me. So I guess it did okay.
Man, that's tough. I'm glad she likes it though. My husband is kind of milquetoast about the whole situation. He's fully supportive of me being creative, and he's like, I want you to do it. That's so great. You know, he loves that I teach and stuff like that. But when he comes to the shows, he's just like, yeah, that was good. And you're like, did you laugh? Some things were funny. And you're like, cool. But what about this one thing that I wrote? Did you think that was cool? Oh yeah, clever. You're like, great. So he really doesn't come to shows anymore.
Then you try to trick him, and you're like, remember I did that scene with Superman? Oh yeah. I didn't do a scene with Superman.
No. I wish. Then I could be vindicated somehow. He he hears everything. He can really hear me in the other room right now. He'll be like, I don't do that. But he's, he'll hear everything and he remembers everything. He's like my mother. He's like, we used to try to trip up my mom like that. You're not listening to me, Mom. Oh yeah. And she'd repeat back the exact thing that you just said to her. And you're like, stupid, whatever, fine. Same with him. I'd be like, are you even listening to me? He's like, you just told me blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I think it's just that his comedy, it's hard for him to see me do it. And I think comedy for him is just sort of a wilder situation that I don't know. I'm always trying to push the envelope. I'm always like, is this crazy enough for you? But, the audience is usually lucky. Wow.
Yeah, with my fiance, it's gotten to the point where it had gotten to the point, because she would go to my shows all the time, where, especially having the director's hat on, I was always deconstructing a scene.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where she was not only deconstructing it with me, she was pointing things out I wasn't even noticing.
Yep.
I'm like, oh God, I've created a monster here. But she was always right. every time she's like, yeah, I noticed. Was that kind of a yes, but type situation? I'm like, oh, man, yeah, that totally was. I got to put that in my notes.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know that my husband could deconstruct improv, but I bet you he could. He gives me some pretty good notes on sketches sometimes. I'll like give him a sketch that I wrote, and I'll be like, what do you think I could do to make it crazier? And he's like, what about? So I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, he's helped me write some of the best ones, some of the ones that have gotten them the biggest laughs. And then I come home and I'm like, babe, this one was a hit. And he's like, yeah, that's right. I'm pretty funny. It's funny though, how like sometimes partners will be into it and hang out all the time. I mean, I even know a bunch of people that like, you know, are dating somebody that they perform with on a regular basis or are married to them for that matter. So it's always interesting to see how that is. Oftentimes I do this podcast with a co-host, Wendell, and he wasn't able to be with us today, but one of the jokes he has is that his girlfriend never ever listens to the podcast. So like, she's always like, oh yeah, good podcast, sweetheart. And he's like, have you ever listened to it? And she's like, yeah, oh, yeah, sure. So we made this thing where at the end of most episodes that he's on with me, at the very end, after we say goodbye, he'll say, all right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and marry me, Michelle. And so like, he asks her to marry him at the end of every episode. He's literally asked her to marry him, like, I would say like 100 times at this point. And it's funny because she still hasn't listened to a single episode. Like, I know we're putting it at the end, so it's a little, you know, it's a real deep cut for her to catch. But man, and then he was like, yeah, she complained to me the other day that I'm not ready to get married. And I was like, she doesn't know. You've been ready for like a year and a half. She's just not paying attention. He's like, it's so funny. It's just, well,
you know what's going to happen?
Yeah.
She's going to listen to this one.
Right?
And then find out that he's
30
trying
minutes
to propose to her for the whole time.
If only. That would be great. That's actually, I thought about it right before I told you this. And I was like, should I say this? Am I giving it away? And I was like, you know what? 110 times. If she listens to this one, maybe she'll get it. Like,
exactly.
It's like he loves you. Come on. Oh man. But it's good that you have a supportive partner because that really helps. And I'm sure it helps during the time that you're spending where you're trying to figure out your next move and stuff like that. And in fact, can I just tell you how happy I am to talk to you about this right now? Because not only am I sort of in the same thing, but again, I just really think it's important for people to acknowledge, like, I am still creative. I'm just waiting for the next wave of whatever my creativity needs to express. The other thing too is that sometimes you need to live life and do things to find things to have comedy about. Like,
yep. Absolutely.
Like if you're not either watching shows that are not related to comedy, or you're not out in the world looking at art, talking to people, figuring out what people are doing in the world, like having a job, just doing regular life stuff, what are you talking about? Like, what exactly are you writing sketches about? I was writing stuff that was like so specific to like being an improviser. And I was like, this is a crappy sketch I've written because it appeals to a tiny handful of people. Like, what am I doing? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to be able to, you know, take time to live your life, and then you can be creative about that.
Absolutely, because I went back. So my original short form group that I was in it's called Delaware Comedy Theater. So I always did have some kind of Delaware connection. And they are based in Rehoboth, which is a beach about 2 hours south of where I am. And then they had a group in Wilmington years and years ago, but they still now just have only the group in Rehoboth. But every anniversary show, or at least, you know, every once in a while, they'll ask me to come back. And so it was, I think, their 13th anniversary they just had. So they asked me to come back, and it was the first, because the festival thing I did was, you know, a 25-minute slot. And so this was the first full show I've done since I left Better the Bacon. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so rusty. Is this really the best first show for me to do back? And I just felt my mind totally clear. And as cliche as it sounds, I was in the moment. And I think that I almost like, I was so mentally rested that even just that show, I'm like, okay, I'm good. And again, whenever the next thing comes along, great. But now I know that time off I've taken for myself, as hard as it's been at times, was probably the best thing I could have done for myself, because I'm sure I was getting stale at some points, and you're burning the candle at both ends, and there is something to be said of, I have no responsibility to the show other than performing to my best ability, but I don't have to produce. I don't have to create a set list. I just have to show up and do it. And I didn't know half the people I was performing with, but that made it feel fresh again. So it was, I really thought taking time off, I didn't know if it was going to be a good or bad thing, but now I can say in hindsight, it's the best thing I could have done for myself, for sure, in all aspects.
Cool. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I have still been teaching, and I haven't performed in a while, but the sort of last vestige of me being around my theater community in Austin was the neighborhood. And when I told one of my besties that I was dropping it, they were like, "What? Is the world coming to an end? What? Are you going to be okay?" And I was like, "I think it's going to be all right. And I think it's going to open the door for other people to do it, and they'll be able to do their own show." And I mean, when I did my sketch show, I always just wanted to show other people that they could do it. Like, come work on this show with me, see what I'm doing, see that you can do it, and then do it on your own. And so people would leave. It was an ebb and a flow of a cast. Over the 8 years with you, was Better Than Bacon the same people, or was there a flow of people in and out of it based on newer students coming through?
It was the same people. Wow. We had one new person come in who was actually a cast member with me back in Delaware Comedy Theater. She came in probably about the 3 or 4 year mark. And we had a couple who, maybe took some time off and came back, but it was the same core group that entire time.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oof, that's almost tougher. Like with me, I'm like, the longest I've worked with any of you is about a year, so it's okay.
Right.
Fine. You worked without me, you work with you worked with me, you worked without me, it's fine. It's all good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's good and bad, because on one hand you become comfortable, but on the bad side you become comfortable, and you could become too comfortable. And it's you kind of, again, on the good side, you know which buttons to push, and okay, I can go up to the line and know without even exactly crossing it, and know how I can try to get the best out of my scene partner. But then there's, I think, just it's unintentional, but I don't want to say complacency, but you just know each other so well that some of the creative spark, I think, goes a little bit. And so that was tricky at times for all of us. And I think we all said it. This isn't any kind of mind blowing thing. We all said this. But we were we had a cast of 11, so we were a pretty big cast. Yeah. And not everybody would do every show, but it was kind of hard to expand from 11.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Man, interesting. So let me take a little side note here and ask you more about the Tax-Free Comedy Festival. How did that go for you? And you said you were co-producer of it. What does that mean exactly? And how did producing this festival, tell me more about it. It seems like a huge endeavor.
It was a huge endeavor, and I think I don't want to say we underestimated how huge it was, but there are so many little things that you don't think about until it smacks you right in the face. We need even little things like, how are we going to ticket? How are we going to, when you have slots, how are you going to let have the people come in and out, et cetera. The idea came about while I was still with Better Than Bacon. And this probably would have been October-ish of last year. And Jana came to a group of us. Jana has an improv background, myself and another guy, Sam, have improv improv backgrounds. And then we had a stand-up, Brandon Jackson, who's a local stand-up in the area. And so she came together, and I think the initial intention was we were going to do improv, stand-up, sketch, and I believe music. And our thought, sort of being predominantly improv, was that it was going to be an improv-heavy festival. And as it turns out, it kind of just by the applications we got, it became much more of a stand-up festival that was kind of sprinkled with some improv and sketch and music in between. And it was an endeavor, but I loved it. I really, really loved it. And we were very surprised by the number of, I think we got something like 83 or 84 applications for this little area in Delaware. We're thinking, wow, this was not a bad first start. And it eventually all there was definitely a point where we all just said, how is this going to come together? And it came together, whether it was by magic, and we all collaborated really well together too. And then we did it over 2 weekends, I think the last weekend of April and first weekend of May. And the one thing I think that was really beneficial among all of us is we sort of had this shared agreement from the very beginning that we know we're going to make mistakes. This is all of our first. None of us had experience doing this before. We had experience being in festivals, and we had been to festivals enough to know what we liked and didn't like, but we allowed ourselves the ability to make mistakes. And by forgiving ourselves before those mistakes were made, I think it made those mistakes a lot easier to swallow. And we were able to have an honest inventory of, okay, these are the things we did great. These are the things that for next year we definitely need to tweak. And it just ended up, we had a couple sellout nights. We had, and it's something Wilmington doesn't really have. They didn't have anything like this before. So to kind of be part of the first cohort to bring something like this to the area was really special. And we're already, the theater liked it enough that we're already on the schedule for next year. Nice. So because that was the other thing, City Theater was sponsoring it, so we knew we had somebody hired to answer to. Yeah. And thankfully they were incredibly supportive from day one. But we knew we had to produce, and we knew that the festival had to go well, and thankfully it did. And there's going to be a second annual one, like I said. So that's really exciting, and we're all excited to do it.
Call out to improvisers and sketch comedians.
That's right.
There's plenty of space for you.
Yep.
How
I think one of the lessons. Yeah. I was just going to say, one of the lessons we learned was I think we're going to go to one weekend next year. Not that we couldn't do it, but I think spreading it out over 2 weekends was one of the lessons of, okay, maybe we might have spread ourselves a little too thin. Sure. So if we just do it over this one weekend and make it really special for this one weekend, we'll see how it goes. We'll definitely see how it goes.
I think it's interesting that you got a lot more stand-up applications, if only just because the essence of stand-up involves them having to promote themselves and sort of be a one-man band. I mean, it's inherent to the nature of a person who is going to choose stand-up as a path for them to be a self-starter and to be able to power themselves and keep it going. Whereas I do find this a lot of time with improv and sketch comedians that there's sort of a reticence, even personally, like even myself, I have a tough time with marketing. Like I just don't know what to say or how to say it. And I see these stand-ups sometimes that are just putting it out there. I'm like, man, I just need to get better at that. Like that is, it's so wild how that is. And I wonder if it's something that has to do with the kind, the part of your brain that you're using, or like the kind of personality that would tend towards one of them versus the other. I don't know.
That's a really good thought. I think there's something to that, because like you said, if you're stand-up, you have no choice. If you want to get stage time, you have no choice but to do it yourself. You have to go to the open mics. You have to get on social media. You have to do all of those things. Improv does too, but... Or
one person in a troupe.
Right, exactly what I was going to say is you can theoretically just rely on that guy or that girl to do it for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is kind of a reticence there. And I will say, I mean, everybody that was selected to be part of the festival did a great job of promoting themselves. But you could, when looking around social media, there was definitely a difference in how a stand-up would promote himself or herself versus how an improv group might promote themselves for the festival. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I've learned a lot about personal branding since starting the podcast. So I'm like 120 something episodes in. And so there've been a lot of different people. And I talk to people at all different levels, not just people who have been doing it a long time. Sometimes I just talk to people. It's like, hey, you just took your first improv class? Get in here. Let's talk about it. Just because I think, you know, all perspectives are important to acknowledge. And I noticed that, you know, just some people, and it doesn't even matter. Some people have been doing it for 10 minutes or some people that have been doing it for 6, 7, 20 years. Like some people are good at creating something for themselves online, like creating a vision of themselves online and, you know, having a personal brand and putting it all over the correct social media sites, whatever those are, and all the like getting the information out properly. Like there was one guy in Austin who like tons of us went to because his shows sold out all the time. And I'd be like, what is the secret? And so he didn't know really what he was doing that was working. So he just wrote down exactly what he did to promote his shows and made a Google Doc and gave it to all of us. Thank you, Jeff Whitaker. That's who that was. It was Jeff Whitaker. But he made it so that the rest of us could be like, okay, crap, how do I do this? And then it was just like, and weirdly, it worked. Like I just did everything he said to do and it worked. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So crazy.
It was interesting with Better Than Bacon, the thing that, going into it, I knew that what was going to set Better Than Bacon apart was the fact that it was suburban, because Philly had so much and suburban Philly had pretty much nothing. And, you know, we outside of those first couple of shows, we were drawing okay crowds. And all of a sudden I started to, almost by happenstance, emphasize the suburban part. And it was sort of the why go to Philly when you can go right here? And that was the light bulb. Like, that was just that was the one word we needed to emphasize to set us apart and to make people take notice of us. And it's a matter of, like you said, I was going to say it before you said it as well, like creating a brand. And so we just branded ourselves as suburban Philly's premier improv troupe. I don't know what metrics we have to possibly say that, but that's just what we did.
Well, I mean, everybody, if you don't know this audience, everyone makes that stuff up. That's not fact-checked information. That's not a thing.
Right.
Now, when you mentioned the first show that you did with Better Than Bacon, it was at a nature preserve. Did you do mostly like party shows or like on location event shows like that? Or did you guys have a home base theater?
We ended up having 4 different home bases at various times. So, and we would still do the party shows every now and then, but we had a show, the first big show that I told you when we sold about 120 it's called Kennett Flash, which is actually a music venue in Kennett Square, which is right near the border of Delaware and PA. And they didn't really have comedy there. So what started as a one-time thing, they're still doing their shows there 8+ years later. And then we did have a regular show in Delaware. We had a regular show at a coffee house, and some of these, you know, came and went too. These weren't all there for those 8 years. And then the last big one we had is that there was a new performing arts center that opened in Westchester, which isn't too far from where I am, and it had been in development forever. It was actually a converted armory, and they had bought the property years and years ago, and it just took forever to get off the ground. And so luckily we were able to get in at the ground level because I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody that was able to get me in to talk with them. And so we ended up having a residency there, and we would do a show every other month. And we were selling out every single show. And the craziest thing was, and this was actually the show where I decided to go, because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to leave, this is the time to leave. So they have three spaces. It's called Uptown Performing Arts Center. So they have 3 spaces in Uptown. They kind of have a black box area, which was our normal performing space. They had a smaller area, and then they had this huge 320 seat auditorium. And like, my grand dream was, how do I sell this out for us? And I had no idea if I was ever going to be able to do it, but that was sort of what my aspiration was. And then one of the cast members, his wife, had a charity in the area, and she said, can Better Than Bacon do something for this charity, do a show? And so we worked at the theater. We put it in the big space on Black Friday and just advertised it. It was Bacon Gives Back. And I said, I was kind of picturing not anywhere on this grandiose scale, but like a comic relief type thing where it's something you can brand, that we're giving the money to charity, or gave a significant amount of the money to charity, but make it a comedy event. And it sold out. 320 seats. And that was the moment where I'm like, time to go. Time to go before we just start selling 10 seats. And they're still doing the residency there too. So it just, over the years, we, like I said, kind of bounced around a little bit. And like I said, we did the occasional graduation party and birthday party and one-off show, but we were really lucky. We were really fortunate. It was a lot of right place, right time type situations for sure.
If you didn't have like a regular slot at a specific theater, how were you marketing this? Were you like contacting places and booking shows like at different theaters? Were people contacting you via a website of some kind? How were you getting all these gigs?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. We would definitely outreach. I would say out of the 4 residencies, so to speak, 2 found us. So there was definitely a combination there and eventually it, especially with the parties, it kind of became word of mouth. And it got to once we had this, like 2017 was our big year of we had 2 shows a month booked for 2017 as of 2016. So I had all my shows booked for 1 calendar year. So I didn't really admittedly try as hard to book other gigs during that time. The few years before that, I was definitely grinding, just sending emails, contacting anybody I possibly could. Some people totally ignore you. Some you talk with and they just don't go anywhere. And some, we were lucky enough to be able to perform with them. So yeah, like I said, it was a little bit of everything. Some fell in our lap, some we sought out and tried to find.
I'm going to shift gears again and ask you about your teaching experience. Where did you finish, or tell me about your education first? Like, where did you get educated in improv? And then when did you turn it around into teaching? And then I'll have a follow-up for that.
Sure. So I learned at Comedy Sports, like I said, beginner through advanced level there. And I wanted to be a short form performer. Like, I was one of those, I watched Whose Line Is It Anyway? Loved it. Like, that was where my passion for improv came from. And to be quite honest, I don't think I really even knew long form existed, probably until like a year or 2 after that. And then, I would do... Yes,
long form lives in the short form shadow, by the way. We have to explain it by using Whose Line Is It Anyway? Every single 101 class I've ever taught. I'm all like, okay, so you've seen the show, right? Yeah. Okay. So it's not that, but.
Yep. Yep.
So you guys are winning. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, back to your wonderful story.
Yeah. So did the class and took all the workshops I could, for a long time. Did a lot of festivals, and during that time, I did have a 2-man long form group that was sort of an amalgamation of short form and long form, in that we were interactive with the audience throughout the show, and that was more to protect me because I had no comfortability with long form whatsoever. And then right around that time is when I just wanted to teach it. And I first taught at a local theater for teenagers, and it was a rough go for I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was sort of kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and it was definitely a big learning experience. And I was glad I did it, because I definitely learned what my strengths and weaknesses were.
Well, and teenagers are the worst people to receive improv. You know that, right?
Yeah.
They're at the worst possible part of your life to acknowledge that anything is plot positive and good.
I was a very naive 26-year-old. I really thought I can change the world and I can reach these kids. No, that didn't work.
It's not you. They've got a cloud of hormones all around them. They don't know what to do with themselves. Yeah.
Yep. So then after that, I taught at the night school, where Better Than Bacon kind of indirectly formed. Did that for several years.
What night school? You could say the night school.
Oh, sorry, Chester County Night School.
Oh.
So that's the county where Better Than Bacon pretty much did most of our shows in Pennsylvania. And then taught at Delaware County Community College, mostly colleges, and then eventually I started teaching at more theaters. And then during that time, I started doing more corporate workshops. Had a friend of mine who had done a lot of work in Philly and needed somebody to help him out with the workshop, and so I signed on to do it, and then started to fall in love with doing that. And now I've been teaching. I've been working up until yesterday. I was working at a college, but I have a new job next week. But I was teaching like improv for leadership workshops for student leaders, and because what I discovered in teaching, like when I first started teaching it, my assumption was everybody was taking it for the same reason I was, which was I saw whose line is it anyway, and I want to go up and be funny. And that was like 10% of the students. Yeah. I had students who were taking it for, because they had crippling stage fright or communications issues. I had one woman who signed up her husband and her teenage son to take my class because they needed to communicate better. And it got a little real at times in some of their scenes, but there was a catharsis. You could see that something was working in terms of them listening better and communicating better. And so I think my classes kind of indirectly transformed into a combination of teaching the art form and then also teaching how it can actually impact you on a bigger level. And I love it. There are definitely aspects of the teaching that I don't want to necessarily say I love more than performing improv, but I found a passion there that I never knew or never thought I would have, for sure.
Well, there's something great about, and perhaps we're similar in this case as well. Oftentimes I will chide myself for living a life in which all I do is perform and entertain people. I'm like, what kind of life? I'm a dancing, singing, like I'm a little like, hey guys, like I'm a jester for life. Like that's what I decided was my life. And sometimes, especially now that I'm getting older and I have a child, I'm all like, oh, I should probably try to help the world somehow. Okay, cool. Yeah. And the idea of improv as a lifestyle, the idea of, yes-anding your life experiences, it's really important, I think. And when I found it myself, I was like, oh, okay, finally I found something. And I don't know, maybe just because this occurred to me, so maybe I can, it can occur to you, but I was like, since I have this hiatus, since I'm taking this time off to spend time at home with my baby and I'm not going to be doing as much theater, I want to figure out what I can do to use the skills that I've developed to empower people, to help people. Yep. Because you're right. It's hard for us to see people doing stuff that's not for the same reasons that we are. I thought the same. When I first started teaching, I was like, you've just been standing on any platform you can your entire life trying to get attention, right? Because that's what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. You know,
me too.
But then there's these people who are dealing with it in such a different way. When you were talking about your students, I thought about this one student I had who was this woman in her 80s. And she was hilarious, by the way. She was the best. And she would always play against type because the younger kids in the class would often make her the mom or make her the grandma or the old lady, as it were, as the butt of the joke. But when she was the one in charge of who she was, she'd always make herself like a mystical creature or a child or like something crazy that was like, deal with this, suckers. And I thought it was so great because it really opened the minds of the younger kids to be like, oh, wait, when you're 80, you're still you. You're just 80. Like there's no, you know, so I thought that was so interesting to experience that kind of thing. Are you going to, do you think now you might, or I don't want to put any words in your mouth, like you've done a lot of workshops, both corporate workshops and just teaching students who are interested in improv. Have you thought about more work when it comes to, you know, empowerment stuff or yes and lifestyle kind of workshops or even TED Talk kind of things?
Definitely, because I've actually done a little bit with the yes and type work. We had in Delaware, we have something called the Millennial Summit, which this past year was the second year that it ran. And through a lot of networking and connections, I had a friend who was able to get me into the summit as a speaker, or I guess more, it was intended to be a workshop type presentation based on yes and it was kind of funny because what happened was I didn't quite have as many at the workshop as I would have hoped for, but then it became an empowerment discussion among 4 or 5 of us about how yes and can work. So I even told them, I said, I had this whole lesson plan that I was going to do today, and I'm improvising this because this didn't go exactly as we planned. And then, but as a part of that as well, they had something called Coach's Corner. So they had me as a coach, along with other life coaches and financial literacy coaches, and that anybody who wanted to schedule a session could come in and talk with us. And I legitimately had no idea what to expect. Wow. And so I met with 4 or 5 different people and 4 or 5 completely different reasons for seeing me. But we were able to talk about how to use yes and how to promote active listening and how to have more confidence in yourself. And it became, again, in a way I never expected to do one-on-one coaching with it. And I didn't even know if I had the capability of doing that. And it just kind of happened that day. So I would definitely love to do more of that. It's actually kind of funny with the new job that I'm starting next week. I'm going to be working for a coding company called Zip Code Wilmington. And it's a nonprofit organization that does a computer coding boot camp. And as part of that, they try to do a lot of life skill training as well. And when I had applied to them, I didn't really put anything about improv in my cover letter, but it was in my resume. And the executive director said, I saw that you teach improv for leadership. Would you like this to be part of your job here? Yeah, I do. That's great. So I'm going to be, in addition to, because I'm going to be working in an admissions capacity there, but in addition to that, I'll be getting to teach improv as part of my job.
That's so great.
Which was totally unexpected, but I'm so grateful and excited that that's going to be a part of what I do.
Wow, you're like legit. Like, that's like for
to
real. Like, I hope you get insurance, because it'd be so great to say I teach improv and I get insurance from it.
Right.
Crazy.
I think that's the legit point. If I can get insurance, I'm officially legit.
I feel like 80% of jobs in America are not legit by that standard then.
Well, that's very true.
I was like, I used to think I was the only one that didn't have it because I did the freelance teaching, but no, I talk to friends that have, fully intense jobs in an office. And I'm like, wait, what? You don't have it? Oh. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird world.
Yeah, whenever we would do, with my short form shows, we would do moving bodies. I would always jokingly say, and please be careful with us because we're not insured. And it would be like, ha, ha, ha. And then it was, no, seriously, we're not. Just don't. Don't hurt me.
Yeah, it's like, seriously, no, don't hurt me, please.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I won't hurt you either, but.
So have you traveled to other states other than Pennsylvania and Delaware to teach improv workshops and stuff? Is that something that you've done for a while?
The only place I traveled to do a workshop and it was tied into a show was, of all places, Maine. And this is when I was doing the 2-man improv group. We did sort of a weekend of shows there and were able to tie the workshop into it. In terms of traveling, it's mostly been local, into the city, like, Philadelphia and things like that. But by and large, haven't quite cast the net as far as maybe I would potentially like to. But there's time for that too.
Well, yeah, it can also certainly be hard when you're like married with kids and stuff like that as well. Like, it's tough to take the trip. I was just talking to my husband about it, and we're just trying to, he was like, why don't you look up festivals where our parents live? And I was like, oh, good point. Like, he's like, that way you can go bring the baby, drop the baby off at the grandparents, and then go teach improv. And I was like, that's why you're the smart one.
Yep.
Because I was like, oh man, when am I ever gonna? And he was like, you can do this. You just need to be creative about it. And I was all like, right. Why are you teaching me how to be creative? But see, he's pretty good at punching up stuff. I'm telling you, he's all right. Oh man. So you're currently working on the Tax-Free Comedy Festival, and you're going to be teaching improv as part of your new job. Are there any, what other things are you doing to fill up your creative cup? Like, are you going to plays? Are you going to museums? Are you binging Netflix? Like, what do you do to keep the creative coffers in your brain flowing in between projects?
A lot of Netflix, for sure. But a lot of documentaries too, and especially about comedians. And I'm listening to which I really didn't do this before. I listen to a ton of comedy podcasts now, improv, stand up, I think that's sort of filling the void in a different way, because now I'm here, kind of like the conversation we've been having where you said it's good to talk to somebody who's going through the same thing. It's good to hear people I look up to who have gone through the same thing, because you put these guys on a pedestal and you think they can't possibly know what I'm feeling, and then you realize they know exactly what I'm feeling and more so. So that's been a weird catharsis for me, is to hear other people go through similar things or watch people go through similar things and see them come out great on the other side of it. So and I've always been fascinated by the behind the scenes of things, and I love hearing the backstories. So that's been, in a weird way, how I've been filling that creative void, because I just love hearing those things. And but I've been definitely been doing the museum thing for sure. Reading a ton. I mean, this doesn't sound like the most fascinating improv catharsis in the world, but it's definitely filled my time. And wedding planning has been it's its own creativity.
Oh my God,
it kind of is.
It's like a big show really that you get to create. Can I tell you a mini horror story about my own wedding?
Sure.
Okay. I know that it's a tough one, and I'm sure I didn't want to give you advice because screw that, right? Mm-hmm. For the rest of your life, when you're married and when you have kids, like all everyone wants to do is give you advice. No, I'm going to tell you about this crazy thing that happened. So my husband does AV for corporate events. So he's an organizer, and I produce shows. So I'm an organizer. So when it came to our wedding, we were like super on top of like details. We had everything taken care of. We had everything prepaid. We had everything set up. There was a list organized, but on the day of, we're kind of the stars of the show, right? So we can't do all the things. Like we can't be the lead in the show and the stage manager at the same time. So we had to get our families who do not have these skills to help us with this part of the show. So it was like, I said show, I mean wedding. And, because that's what it is. It's just it's like a show. So you got this. It's just a matter of now you need to, and I didn't realize this, that wedding planners are essentially stage managers, but might I suggest, no, look at me giving advice. I needed a stage manager is all I'm saying. So we made up. So the day of, right? So we got married at the church where my husband, like, you know, had his first communion, all the things. He was like very involved in it in Houston. And we got married there, and then we were going to have the reception in their hall, like right behind the chapel. Great. But the church is like, you're getting married at 3 p.m. and you can only be in the back room to set up between 10 a.m. and noon. Lord knows why they have these rules. I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to me. But we were like, got it. On top of it, taking care of it. Now that day, like I said, we're the stars of the show. We can't be the people setting up the space. And so we wrote out a list. We like created a mock table. We took pictures of it. We wrote out the list of things that everyone had to do in the order of events. We set up everything. I mean, it was the most beautiful production manual you've ever seen. It was like, this is how to accomplish it. And we give it to the families, and we're like, okay, guys, you have to be there at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and you got to do this, and they're like, we got it. No problem. Hi, you've got it. So the day of, I'm like getting my hair done or whatever and my nails done. And my husband is having breakfast with his best friend from college, and they're like hanging out and having a great time. And they get finished with their brunch around like 11, and they're like, let's go check on them and see how they're doing. And they like swing over to the church, to the room in the back, and there is no one there. Oh, no. 0 people have gone to do the setup of our wedding. And it's between 10 and 12 that we can go. And it's 11 a.m. And my husband and his best friend from college show up, and they're like, oh my God. So our plastic bins filled with the stuff are in the space. And that's it. Like, it's just empty tables, nothing's done. And they're like, ah! So my husband and his best friend literally set up the entire room in 45 minutes. And like, just at like 11:45, a few family members just like amble in. They're like, oh, hey, how's it going? We're here to do the work. And boy, howdy, did my husband rip him a new one. He's all like, we told you between 10 and 12. It was such a hilarious, like, I was like, you and I are the show makers, babe. This is why they don't know how to do this. They don't know how to organize this. So stage managers are important in weddings. I say that. I promise no advice. Look at me. I'm giving advice. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
No, I'm so glad you said this, because this sounds like this is how my wedding's going to go. So, because I have totally treated this, because even when I did Better Than Bacon, I had entrance music, I had interlude music.
Yeah.
Like, I made it almost like a pro wrestling show.
Sure.
And so I've sort of had the same mentality for my wedding, where it's like, okay, this is where we hit the music, and we have... Yeah, it's very much like, I don't want to call it a theatrical production, but it's kind of a theatrical production. And I never thought about the aspect that I can't actually do those things on the day of my wedding.
Yeah.
So this actually is incredibly helpful because I have a good month and a half to figure this out now. So that's good.
Just find a stage manager to be there. And that's just find one of your friends who's good at stage managing and have them just be in there, making sure people are getting their stuff done on time. You know, stage managers, they're good at that. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was a tough one. And it's tough when you're like the theatrical one because your family assumes that you've got it under control because you usually have it under control.
Right.
Yeah. So crazy. They were like, I just thought I was coming to a party. I was like, a party you had to set up. Like, come on, man. Oh, man. Ugh, it was totally wild in that respect. Well, I'm glad you got a month and a half left. I'm glad that like helped. I'm sorry if that was like so crazy to like give you I didn't mean to give you weird advice because again,
no, not at all. I should just make sure I tell my fiance about this now and not wait for her to listen to the podcast because
yeah, also,
we're both the same way.
Yeah, she's by the way she's not gonna listen to an hour in. I mean, people that are the audience, wonderful audience that will make it through this, they're great, but none of our partners will ever hear this far.
No. So I guess I've already proposed to her, so I can't do that at the end of the podcast anyway.
Yeah, it's like, you're definitely going to marry me. That's so funny. Oh, man. Hey, really great talking to you. I really appreciate it. I feel such a kinship with you. There's so many things that like I'm going through and you're going through, and it's like, I really appreciate it. There's something really like comforting about being able to talk to you, knowing that we're sort of in similar things. And hey, maybe that's your superpower. I liked the that stuff you were talking about, the individual coaching that you did. I mean, yeah, you've helped me. So I imagine you'd help every person that you talk to.
Thank you. I genuinely appreciate that. And it's been so fun being on here. Thank you so much.
Good. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I think that's about all the time we have. So enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy your day, audience. And also, Michelle, of course, you should marry Wendell. It's important that we mention that, of course.
Very important.
Thanks for listening to Yes But Why podcast.